Black CEO, mocked by billionaire's wife at gala hours. Later, she cut $1, 9B and crushed their empire. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. You people never know your place. The sentence didn't just cut the air, it detonated inside the gilded ballroom, shattering the music, the murmurs, the illusion of elegance. 100 crystal droplets trembled in the chandeliers overhead, as if even the light recoiled from the venom in her voice. At the center of it all stood her, the black woman in the burnt orange gown, skin catching the chandelier glow like molten amber. Shoulders steady, chin lifted, hands clasped lightly in front of her as though the storm didn't concern her at all. Across from her, the billionaire's wife, a woman wrapped in silver sequins and inherited arrogance, thrust her finger forward with such force the air seemed to bend around it. Her hair was sculpted to perfection. Her anger was not. "You shouldn't even be in this section," she hissed, voice cracking through the ballroom like a blade dragged across glass. "This table is for actual donors, not strays who wandered in from the staff corridor." Gasps fluttered. Someone dropped a fork. A man near the bar straightened, awkward, frozen between conscience and cowardice. The crowd shifted like a single organism, turning, whispering, raising phones. Screens lit the room with a cold, predatory glow. Every camera lens pointed at the woman in orange, waiting for embarrassment, waiting for collapse. But she didn't move. A stillness spread around her, not the stillness of fear, but of calculation, of understanding, of a force choosing whether or not to break loose. The billionaire himself stood a few steps behind his wife, expression tight, chin lifted, enjoying the performance more than he should have. When she jabbed her finger again, he gave a small, approving nod. "Look at her," the wife scoffed loudly. "Dressed like she belongs, standing like she matters. This is a charity gala, not a fantasy camp." Someone laughed, weak, nervous. Someone else murmured, "Is she going to say something?" But the woman in orange simply exhaled, slow, deliberate, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop with her. Before the wife could resume her tirade, a voice moved through the narration, calm and measured. "Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. The wife's fury only sharpened. "Don't pretend you don't hear me," she spat, stepping closer, silver gown glittering like a weapon under the chandeliers. "People like you." The woman in orange finally lifted her gaze, just her eyes, and the entire ballroom stalled. No flash of anger, no tremble, just a cold, regal clarity, the kind that comes from someone who has lived long enough to recognize the shape of prejudice before it even forms on the tongue. The wife blinked, thrown for a breath, then recovered. "Oh, don't look at me like that. You're lucky security hasn't escorted you out already." The crowd inhaled as one. Phones rose higher. A woman near the stage mouthed, "This is going viral." The billionaire smirked. But then something shifted. It was subtle. A pressure change. A silence that grew roots, anchoring itself deep beneath the marble floors. Because the woman in orange smiled. Barely. A crescent of patience, sharpened by inevitability. She smoothed her gown, a gesture simple enough to seem harmless, yet precise enough to feel like a warning. And for the first time all night, the billionaire's wife hesitated. She did not yet know that the woman standing in front of her wasn't a misplaced guest, or a social climber, or an inconvenience. She was the decision-maker behind almost $2 billion of funding, and within the next few hours, the empire surrounding this chandeliered room would crumble at the touch of her hand. But for now, she simply stood there, silent, unmoved, watching the people who believed she didn't belong moments before she would show them whose name actually held the power. The laughter didn't return. It tried small breaths of arrogance fluttered through the tables like dying embers, but the room refused to reignite. Something in the woman's stillness had smothered the flame. A single violinist, mid-performance, shifted uneasily. His bow trembled, dragging a thin, broken note that skated across the ballroom like a crack in porcelain. Guests shifted in their chairs. A waiter paused mid-step, tray hovering in the air. Even the chandeliers seemed to dim a fraction, as if the room itself had sensed the shift before its occupants did. The billionaire's wife blinked rapidly, as though trying to re-seize control by sheer will. "Don't stare at me like that," she snapped, but the edge in her voice bent inward, betraying a fracture she hadn't meant to reveal. "I don't care who invited you. You don't belong here. Not in this room. Not at this table." The woman in orange didn't flinch. Her gaze traveled slow, deliberate across the faces watching her. People who had chuckled seconds earlier now leaned back, uncertain. A senator cleared his throat. A young tech founder lowered his phone, afraid the moment he was recording might turn on him next. Something unseen tightened, like the air had been wound around an invisible spool. Near the far corner of the ballroom, a pair of event planners whispered urgently, their clipboards pressed to their chests. Their eyes darted between the stage screen where sponsor logos rotated like planets in a gold-lit universe and the unfolding tension. One of them frowned at a flicker in the corner of the monitor, as if a name had appeared a moment too early, then vanished. The billionaire finally stepped forward, smoothing his tux jacket with a forced, aristocratic ease. "Evelyn," he murmured to his wife, "you're drawing unnecessary attention." But his eyes said something else entirely. "Don't stop." He wanted dominance displayed loudly, publicly for everyone to witness. So she straightened, lifted her chin, and doubled down. "You think that dress makes you fit in?" Evelyn scoffed, voice sharpening. "You think standing here silently makes you look powerful? It makes you look lost." She let out a brittle laugh. "People like you always are." Another note from the orchestra faltered. Another hush rippled. Another fracture spread through the golden air. A man near the center table exhaled slowly. "This feels wrong," he whispered to his wife. She didn't answer, her eyes fixed on the woman in orange, not out of sympathy, but out of something stranger. Curiosity, wariness, recognition of a presence she hadn't noticed when the evening began. Because now, under the gilded glow, the woman didn't appear diminished. She seemed centered, grounded. Her posture was too precise, her breathing too calm, her eyes too steady for someone cornered. It was the kind of composure that came only from someone accustomed to being underestimated and weaponizing it. A few guests exchanged glances, the kind that asked silent questions. Who is she? Why isn't she reacting? Why does she look like she's waiting for something? Evelyn's voice cracked again, sharper this time. "Say something!" The command rang through the ballroom, louder than she intended. But the woman didn't obey. She let the silence answer for her. It stretched, thickened, took shape. And the longer she remained quiet, the more the crowd realized that silence could be more dangerous than outrage. The billionaire's smile faded first. Then the donors stopped recording. Then the waitstaff froze. Because deep beneath the polished marble floors and the 1,000-carat vanity, an instinct older than etiquette stirred. They were not watching a woman being put in her place. They were watching someone decide whether to reveal hers. And though no one in that room knew it yet, every second of this quiet, every breath, every flicker of light was pulling them closer to the moment when their entire world would tilt. For now, she simply looked at the couple who believed they owned the room. But the room was already shifting toward her. Long before this ballroom tried to smother her dignity under velvet and gold, she had learned that silence could be a weapon sharper than any insult. And tonight, her silence was the final echo of a journey the people in this room could never imagine. Her name, the name no one here recognized, was Naomi Sinclair, 48 years old, founder of Sinclair Meridian Capital. A financial architect whose strategies were quietly studied in boardrooms but never attributed to the woman behind them. A ghost in an industry dominated by men who thought power required volume. Naomi had built a reputation on absence, rarely photographed, never interviewed, impossible to predict, and even harder to oppose. The public knew her company. The markets felt her influence, but almost no one knew her face. And that invisibility had once been a necessity. She grew up on the south side of Atlanta, in a two-bedroom apartment where every dollar had to report for duty. Her grandmother, Lila, raised her with a firmness wrapped in tenderness, a woman who cleaned office buildings at night and taught Naomi multiplication tables at dawn. Lila would come home exhausted, hands raw from bleach, but still insist on lighting a single candle in the kitchen window. "So you remember, baby," she would say, "darkness only wins when you let it." Naomi carried that candlelight into every room she entered, even this one. She was 12 when she realized how the world treated people like her. A bank manager once addressed her grandmother as "girl." A boutique clerk followed them through every aisle. A security guard questioned them for touching handbags placed openly on display. Naomi learned the pattern early. Judgment first, explanation never, respect optional. So she built a life where she would never need permission again. By 27, she had engineered a breakthrough predictive model that restructured risk portfolios for Fortune 500 seconds. By 30, she was the shadow advisor behind 3 international turnarounds. By 35, she launched Sinclair Meridian. With money she raised herself, no legacy funders, no old money patrons, no gatekeepers shaping her destiny. By 40, firms that once ignored her now begged for her counsel. And yet, she had remained hidden by choice. Because being unseen gave her leverage, and leverage was the purest currency in the financial world. The irony was exquisite. The ballroom tonight was filled with people who quoted her strategies, studied her algorithms, and depended on her capital flows. Yet not a single one recognized the woman standing in the orange gown, absorbing their disdain. The couple now humiliating her had no idea they had built their most ambitious expansion on capital she controlled. They had toasted her signature without knowing it belonged to a black woman they wouldn't have allowed past their front gate. Naomi hadn't come to the gala for spectacle. She had come for verification. Months earlier, her analysts detected irregularities in the Windsor Group's filings, inflated valuations, disguised debt, and a liquidity gap threatening to widen into a sinkhole. She agreed to fund the $1 Ford 9B stabilization package only after exhaustive due diligence, not to save them, but to test whether they could still be salvaged. And tonight was supposed to be the handshake moment, the formal introduction, the unveiling of the silent architect behind their redemption. But then she arrived at the ballroom and saw their names glowing across massive LED screens, founders, visionaries, saviors, while workers, staff, and even certain guests were treated like disposable props. That was her first warning. Evelyn's outburst was merely the confirmation. The Windsor Empire wasn't sick because of bad investments. It was sick because of rot at the top. Naomi studied the couple, now the entitlement, the carelessness, the eagerness to humiliate someone they assumed beneath them, and a quiet, irrevocable decision took shape behind her eyes. They were not partners, they were liabilities. And liabilities in her world were handled swiftly. Tonight would not end the way the Windsors expected. Tonight, the candlelight her grandmother lit decades ago would burn through an empire built on borrowed power. If Naomi Sinclair's rise had been carved from grit, discipline, and candlelit resolve, the Windsors' legacy had been stitched from velvet, illusion, and a century of inherited applause. The world saw the Windsors as untouchable, old money royalty, patrons of art, philanthropy, and every institution hungry for prestige. Their name occupied wings of museums, hospital atriums, university libraries, each engraved plaque, a monument not to generosity but to control. But behind the gold-leafed mythology, their empire sat on a fault line. Richard Windsor, the patriarch, had inherited a dynasty built by his ruthless grandfather, a man who struck deals during the Great Depression with the delicacy of a pickaxe. But Richard lacked both the instinct and the hunger that had forged the family fortune. He inherited wealth the way one inherits an heirloom sword, gleaming on the outside, rusting beneath the sheath, and instead of wielding it, he displayed it. Richard's business strategies were built on 3 pillars. Pretend everything is fine. Pretend louder when it isn't, and when all else fails, borrow. For years, he papered over collapsing assets with loans wrapped in glamour. His board bowed out of loyalty, fear, or self-preservation. No one dared whisper the truth, that the Windsor Empire was corroding from the inside out. Then came Evelyn. Richard's wife was not born into wealth. She had married it. A former pageant darling with a grin sharpened on competition. She learned quickly that charm opened rooms, but cruelty kept them. Evelyn did not maintain high society, she policed it. Her taste for humiliation was legendary. Events she hosted ran on three elements: champagne, string quartets, and social casualties. People called her elegant. They didn't see the violence beneath the glitter. She and Richard were a perfect pairing of delusion. He pretended the empire was intact. She pretended she deserved the throne. And for years the world helped them pretend. But the truth was merciless. Behind the marble columns and curated soirees, the Windsor Group was drowning. Faulty acquisitions, over-leveraged expansions, a real estate portfolio bleeding value, each misstep had compounded into a storm of red ink. The gaps grew so wide that even Richard's most creative accounting couldn't bridge them. Then came the whisper of salvation, a stabilizing package worth nearly $2 billion, Sinclair Meridian. Richard had never met Naomi Sinclair. He imagined an aging white financier, stiff suit, booming voice, ego matching his own. He had no idea the architect behind his supposed rescue wore an orange gown and the calm of a woman unbothered by borrowed power. He had no idea tonight's gala, meant to celebrate their new partnership, existed solely because Naomi allowed it to. And he had absolutely no idea how fragile that permission was. As for their daughter, Claire Windsor, she inherited her mother's talent for cruelty but not her father's restraint. Claire's flirtations with scandal were recurring, tabloid-fueled DUIs waved away, designer tantrums in Monaco boutiques, a social media trail of jokes that required emergency PR fire drills. Her brother Alden was worse, a trust fund arsonist with a taste for risky tech ventures, each one burning millions. His father covered the flames with more borrowed capital. Together, the family had built an empire of entitlement, propped up by money that wasn't truly theirs, guarded by a reputation they no longer deserved. And so the gala tonight, shimmering under chandeliers and empty promises, was more than a celebration. It was a lifeline, a mask, a final attempt to persuade the world that they were still the Windsors everyone revered. Then Evelyn pointed at Naomi. Then she hissed her venom. Then she mocked a woman whose signature held the fate of their existence. And in that moment, the entire foundation, their empire, rested on the loans, the illusions, the quiet desperation, cracked. They believed they were humiliating a nobody. They were, in truth, insulting the last person on earth capable of saving them, and Naomi had just decided they weren't worth saving. The ballroom hadn't recovered from the silence Naomi created. It hung there, suspended between chandeliers and whispers thick enough to bend time itself. And in that suspended second, Naomi finally moved. Not much, not dramatically, just enough. She reached into the side of her gown and withdrew her phone, a sleek, obsidian-black device that caught the golden light like a blade drawn under moonlight. It was a motion so gentle it should have been forgettable, but somehow, it wasn't. Evelyn's smirk faltered. Richard's shoulders tensed. A ripple moved through the tables as if someone had disturbed the surface of a still pond. Naomi didn't glance at anyone when she unlocked the screen. Her eyes remained forward, calm, unbothered, almost regal, while her thumb glided across the glass with the precision of someone accustomed to commanding empires quietly. A single vibration buzzed against her palm. A message preview appeared. Rachel, CFO, final numbers confirmed. Shall we proceed? The Windsors, oblivious, assumed she was texting a friend, a distraction, a retreat. But the staff near the stage saw something they didn't. The sponsor carousel glitched again. Sinclair Meridian. Flash. Disappear. Flash again. As if the system kept trying to reveal a truth the gala wasn't prepared for. Naomi typed back just 2 words. Begin extraction. Across the city, servers responded like a living organism jolted awake. Automated protocols ignited. Accounts began shifting. Credit lines recalculated. A financial web so complex the Windsors had never even seen its edges tightened. None of that was visible in the ballroom, of course. What was visible was the way Naomi lifted her gaze after sending the message, slow, deliberate, and met Evelyn's eyes with a calm so unnerving the air itself seemed to hesitate. Evelyn scoffed, masking the tremor in her throat. "What? Calling security on us?" she sneered, laughter thin as cracked glass. "Go ahead. They know who pays them." Naomi tilted her head slightly, not mocking, not challenging, just observing a doomed assumption. Richard stepped forward, forced politeness curdling around the edges. "Madam, if you're feeling uncomfortable, perhaps we can find you a seat more suitable." The room flinched at the word suitable. So did the truth. Naomi's voice, when it finally entered the air, was soft enough to make the chandeliers lean in. "I'm exactly where I need to be." A chill threaded through the tables. People didn't know why they reacted, only that the sentence carried weight. Old weight. Generational weight. The kind of weight spoken by someone who didn't just have power, but owned the consequences of it. Across the ballroom, the event technician's monitor flickered again. This time, the Sinclair Meridian logo didn't vanish. It pulsed steady, insistent until the tech squinted and muttered, "What the hell?" Naomi slipped her phone back into her gown, but the atmosphere continued to shift around her like metal pulled by a magnet. Evelyn tried to laugh again, but found no audience. Even the donors who had been eager to film the spectacle now lowered their phones, sensing that the narrative had changed and they were on the wrong side of it. "Is this supposed to intimidate us?" Richard asked, attempting authority he no longer possessed. "You won't get far trying to embarrass the Windsor family." Naomi studied him for a long moment, not with anger, not with indignation, but with the measured patience of someone choosing which pillar to remove from a collapsing structure. Then she said quietly, "I'm not here to embarrass you, Mr. Windsor." A pause. "I'm here to end the illusion." The entire ballroom inhaled at once. On stage, the sponsor screen finally stopped flickering. One logo remained, bright, sharp, unavoidable. Sinclair Meridian Primary, underwriter of the Windsor Group. A few guests gasped. Someone whispered, "Oh my God, she's the funder." Another corrected him, "No, she's the Sinclair." Evelyn's breath hitched. Richard's jaw went slack. And Naomi Sinclair, the woman they thought didn't belong in the room, simply stood there, illuminated under the chandeliers, now bowing their light toward her. Moments earlier, the Windsors believed they were dealing with an inconvenience. Now they understood. They were dealing with the architect of their survival, and she had just withdrawn her permission to save them. The moment the Sinclair Meridian logo froze on the screen, a shift rippled through the ballroom, sharp, electric, unmistakable. It was the soundless equivalent of glass shattering. Everyone felt it, even if they couldn't name it. Across the city, Naomi's command, two simple words, had already detonated through networks the Windsors never knew existed. "Begin extraction." And extraction began. At the Windsor Group's headquarters, automated alerts lit up trading floors like a grid of red constellations. Servers hummed louder, liquidity channels rerouted, pending authorizations evaporated mid-transfer. Banking partners received termination notices stamped with legally airtight precision. But the ballroom had no idea, not yet. They only saw Naomi standing still, while the world she controlled began reconfiguring around her. A man near the stage pulled out his phone to search her name. 1 second passed, 2. Then his eyes widened as results spilled across the screen. Forbes mentions, financial analyses, industry whispers, blacked-out profile photos. He mouthed one word, "Billionaire." Another guest overheard. The word spread like a fuse catching fire. Meanwhile, Evelyn stumbled back a half-step. "This is ridiculous," she hissed, clawing for composure. "Some sort of tech glitch. Richard, say something." But Richard couldn't. His phone buzzed sharply. Then again. He fumbled to unlock it, and the color drained from his face as he read the notifications. Transfer denied. Underwriter approval revoked. Credit line frozen pending review. Merger agreement suspended. One after another, the messages stacked relentless, merciless, mathematical. A financial avalanche triggered by a single thumb, tapping a single command. Richard swayed. This This can't be real. Alden Windsor, who until this moment had spent most of the gala taking selfies in the corner, rushed to his father. "Dad? What happened?" Richard scanned the room like he expected the chandeliers to answer. She's pulling out. "The funding. All of it. She's pulling out." Evelyn's jaw dropped. No. She wouldn't dare. "She can't." Naomi turned her head slightly. Just slightly. Enough to let her gaze rest on the couple whose empire shed just unplugged from life support. "She can," someone whispered nearby. "She did," someone else replied. On stage, the event technician's monitor went haywire. Pie charts dissolved. Donor lists blinked out one by one. A notification pulsed. "Sponsor feed disconnected source." "Sinclair Meridian," he muttered. "Oh God, the whole backbone was hers." Then the screens behind him shifted again, this time revealing a legal banner stamped with a stark black insignia. "Notice of funding withdrawal, Sinclair Meridian Capital effective immediately." And then, beneath it, $1. 9B. Reclamation protocol initiated. The room erupted, not loudly, not chaotically, but with a low, rising murmur of disbelief, a sound like a continent shifting beneath marble floors. Phones buzzed back to back, Windsor Group stock plummeting, analysts predicting collapse, partnership dissolved, unrecoverable liquidity gap. Every headline hit the gala faster than champagne trays could circle the tables. Evelyn gripped her chair. "Naomi, stop this. You don't understand what you're doing." But Naomi did, perfectly. "Your conduct clarified everything," she said, calm as a surgeon preparing an incision. "Sinclair Meridian partners only with institutions that value dignity." Richard stepped forward, desperation cracking his voice. "Please, we can fix this. A misunderstanding shouldn't cost billions." Naomi's gaze didn't soften. "A misunderstanding? That was not a misunderstanding. That was your culture." A sharp inhale rolled through the guests. The orchestra, unsure whether to continue, lowered their instruments one by one. The lights dimmed slightly, perhaps by accident, perhaps because even the electricity understood the moment. And there, in the center of the ballroom, Naomi Sinclair delivered the sentence that would echo across headlines within the hour. "Your empire relied on my trust, and tonight you lost both." The Windsors stood frozen, watching the greatest extraction of capital their family had ever experienced unfold in real time. The guests, once eager spectators of humiliation, now looked at Naomi with something entirely different. Awe, fear, respect. The room did not belong to the Windsors anymore. It belonged to her. The collapse didn't roar through the ballroom. It slithered fast, silent, merciless through every glowing phone screen in the room. One guest gasped, then another, then dozens. Notifications detonated like digital fireworks. Windsor Group stock halts trading liquidity concerns. Sinclair Meridian withdraws $1. 9B. Lifeline. Analysts. Empire may not survive the night. The murmurs thickened into a current that circled the ballroom, wrapping itself around the Windsors like a tightening rope. Even those who had reveled in Evelyn's insults minutes earlier now shrank away from her, unwilling to be photographed within the blast radius of her downfall. A live streamer near the back whispered into her mic, "This gala just turned into a historic corporate implosion," as the viewership count on her screen skyrocketed. But the real explosion was on social media. Number Who is Sinclair? Number Windsor Collapse? Number Galagate? One hashtag after another erupted as clips of Evelyn pointing and sneering spread across platforms. Someone had captured the exact moment Naomi lifted her phone, the moment the power dynamic inverted, and the internet devoured it like prophecy. "Woman in orange is the Sinclair." She ended an empire without raising her voice. Dignity hits harder than humiliation. Even journalists at the press table forgot professionalism. One stood up so abruptly his chair slammed backward. Another typed furiously, chasing the headline before the world fully understood what had happened. At the center of the storm, the Windsors were unraveling. Evelyn's face flushed scarlet, panic finally piercing her arrogance. "Stop filming!" she shouted, but the command only fed the frenzy. Cameras swung toward her, hungry for the fall of someone who'd spent her life stepping on others. Richard clutched his phone like a lifeline that refused to hold him. "We can recover," he muttered to no one. "We just need. We need." But everyone already knew what they had lost: their liquidity, their credibility, their future. Naomi watched quietly as the room shifted around her. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't spite. It was clarity, the kind her grandmother taught her. Power is not proven by noise, but by consequence. Across the ballroom, guests began migrating subtly at first, forming an invisible perimeter around Naomi. They weren't protecting her. They were aligning themselves with reality. Influence had gravity, and hers had just bent the floor beneath their feet. A board member whispered, "We should speak with Miss Sinclair." A donor replied, "We should stay out of her way." By the time the orchestra finally surrendered and set their instruments down, the room had fully transformed. The Windsors stood isolated in a shrinking island of gold and panic. Naomi stood calm, unshaken, at the center of a widening orbit of respect, and the world outside was already rewriting their names, reassigning power, shifting alliances, recalculating futures. Tonight wasn't just a scandal, it was a correction. The ballroom had turned into a silent amphitheater, every guest holding their breath as Naomi stepped forward. Not far, just enough to close the empty space that Evelyn's arrogance had created. Her heels whispered against the marble, each step measured, unhurried, inevitable. Evelyn stiffened as Naomi approached. Richard swallowed hard. Alden and Claire hovered behind them like cracked porcelain ornaments. Naomi stopped only inches away, close enough for Evelyn to feel the cool steadiness radiating from her, the kind of calm that didn't come from restraint, but from certainty. For the first time that evening, Evelyn's voice trembled. "What do you want from us?" Naomi raised an eyebrow, the smallest gesture, yet it sank into the room like an anchor. "What I want," she repeated softly. "Nothing. That was always the difference between us. You needed my presence to feel powerful. I never needed yours." A harsh shiver went through Evelyn's spine. The crowd pressed closer, careful not to interrupt the gravity of the moment. Richard found his voice, brittle and desperate. "We can negotiate. There must be something, some arrangement to undo this." Naomi's gaze slid to him, cool and precise. "Negotiate with what? Your equity is underwater, your assets are collapsing, and your reputation." She allowed the silence to finish the sentence for her. "You've already destroyed yourselves." Evelyn's eyes reddened, fury overtaking fear. "You humiliated us in front of everyone." Naomi didn't blink. "You humiliated yourselves when you mistook cruelty for status." The words traveled through the ballroom, striking with such force that even the chandeliers seemed to reverberate. Several guests lowered their heads, ashamed of how quickly they had once laughed at Evelyn's side. Naomi turned her attention fully on Evelyn, now not unkind but unwavering. "You wanted the room to see you dominate someone you believed was beneath you, a beat. Now they see you for what you are without the illusion." Evelyn's composure shattered. "You ruined everything." "No," Naomi answered quietly. "I revealed everything." Richard reached out as if grabbing the last remnant of control. "Please, Miss Sinclair, the company, our employees, there must be a way to salvage Naomi." Stepped past Evelyn, past Richard, past the trembling heirs behind them, then turned just enough for her final words to reach them, and no one else missed them. "Your empire collapsed the moment you decided dignity was optional. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be." The guests parted for her as she walked away, not out of fear, but reverence. A woman who didn't raise her voice, yet made the entire room kneel to truth. Behind her, the Windsors stood in ruins, shattered wealth, trembling pride, and the humiliating awareness that power had never belonged to them in the first place. And Naomi, without glancing back, stepped toward the exit, toward the future she controlled. The confrontation was over. The judgment was complete. By morning, the Windsor Empire stopped pretending. Trading floors opened to a tidal wave of red. Creditors lined up like mourners. Subsidiaries declared emergency restructuring. Analysts called it the most rapid unmasking of a corporate dynasty in recent history. The Windsors tried to issue statements, long, polished, hollow, but the world had already seen the truth in real time. Arrogance isn't a sign of power. It's the sign of its absence. Meanwhile, Naomi Sinclair didn't attend a single interview. She didn't post a statement. She didn't celebrate. She simply returned to her office, the skyline glinting against the floor-to-ceiling windows, and signed the final documents redirecting the entire $1 9B package, not to another corporation, not to another dynasty, but to the Lila Foundation, named after her grandmother, the new fund dedicated to advancing education, business ownership, and legal support for underrepresented communities. A journalist later described the move as a financial correction with a moral compass. Naomi didn't correct her. She didn't need to. Across the city, people replayed the gala footage, watching silence defeat cruelty, watching dignity outshine inherited wealth, watching a woman stand tall in a room designed to make her shrink. What lingered wasn't the collapse of the Windsors. It was the rise of clarity. That night in the ballroom, Naomi had not shouted, threatened, or demanded recognition. She had simply refused to be diminished. And in doing so, she reminded an entire room, an entire world, that real power doesn't arrive with applause or chandeliers or last names carved into marble. Real power walks in quietly, stands its ground, and lets the truth speak for itself. Naomi Sinclair stepped out of the gala into the cool night air, the city humming beneath her like a world resetting. There was no triumph in her expression, only purpose. The kind that builds, the kind that heals, the kind that endures. And as the doors closed behind her, the legacy of the Windsors faded, while hers had only just begun.